if we lose uh,
Yeah, lose audio again.
audio, then it will count. She can basically send you the file. So
Nah, kind of kicking myself out because I got a little memo thing on my phone, of course, and I'd even thought before I came to the con that I should we just have that ready to
yeah,
go and all that jazz. But
but this is the first and the last.
so Jeff Barry here is a couple of artifacts for us, some dice sets.
This is the pair I got from Gary Gygax in 1975, and this is the pair I got from Malia, Dave Arneson's daughter, at Dave's
Uh-huh.
funeral. So it's literally the first and the last.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is my dice box. It's been around for like 50 years, and so I have something of everything in here. I knew Luzaki, so
Do you have weather dice by chance?
they're in here
Great.
someplace.
I should really get some weather dice.
Yeah. But a lot of companies came out. I mean, one of these bins has got all the specialty six-siders, like for doors and traps and things like that.
Uh-huh.
One of the funnier ones is this bin, which is all the blank platonic solids.
Oh, lovely.
So, but there's other
Yeah.
things like we were
Yeah.
talking about Tekumel.
Hmm.
Let's see. Well, those are my loaded dice, casino
Perfect.
dice.
Hmm.
Two of them always roll sevens or 11s.
Great dice.
There's all my Tekumel dice and
Oh, wow.
coins that Bill Hoyt made.
He made coins?
Yeah, he had them
Fantastic.
stamped out. Yeah, but those are the
Except
gold
that,
Titar, the
yeah.
silver, the silver coin, and then the copper coin.
Hmm.
Because Gary told Phil he wanted, gold, silver, and copper. And then these are the Kevik dice for the dice game from Tekumel.
Hmm.
And Phil found a set of blank red dice. So I sat down with my Moto tool and I made these in 1976.
Oh my
So these are
gosh.
literally 50 years old.
Hmm.
And then Bill made another set, and basically you roll the dice and you're betting on own god, enemy god kind of thing.
Hmm.
And this is one of Bill's sets. Let's see, yeah, but this is actually a stability set. Mine is Lord Vamukla, Lord Sarkos, because those are the traditional enemies.
Hmm.
So
Well, let's just take it back for a
yeah,
moment so I can make sure I get this on video for posterity's
yeah,
sake. Because you had mentioned that Tony Bath and Donald Featherstone were pretty big influences
very much
in the
so.
area.
Because the major thrust of gaming in the Twin Cities at that time was Tom and the Littleton Soldier Shop, what had been La Belle Alliance out in the western suburbs. He moved it down onto Lake Street, and that became kind of the hub of gaming. Just up the street was Fifth Precinct, the police station, where another
Uh-huh.
gaming group was, and then Dave Arneson had conflict simulation at the University of Minnesota.
Yeah.
But the common thing in all of this is that it was historical miniatures gaming. Pete Gaylord, for example, is the one who got me into Ancients.
Yeah.
So we were all had the Featherstone books, the Tony Bath books. That was all that was available.
Hmm.
Charles Grant, everybody from England. At that time, there was this huge upsurge in publications from England,
Hmm.
and that's what was coming into the shelves in the game stores. One each game store in the
Yeah.
Twin Cities. And so we all had copies of those, and that's what we used. And it was, I mean, at that point, 1/72nd scale miniatures from Rocco in Austria had just come into play. So everything was based on 20 millimeter gaming these days.
Yeah.
But a lot of the game companies were doing 25s and the rules didn't work. So it prompted this explosion of people like Gary Gygax down in Lake Geneva
Hmm.
to come out with a whole bunch of rules specifically scaled for 28 millimeter figures,
Hmm.
Cavaliers and Roundheads, ancient battles, things like that.
Hmm.
And for quite a long time, Lake Geneva was the heart of gaming in the United States because there were some guys like Len whatever the guy.
Lakofka, I think it
Yeah,
was.
that's
Yeah.
it. In on the East Coast, and you had a few people on the West Coast, but primarily it was an East Coast thing. Here in the Midwest, because of the connections, Bill Hoyt went to England, Dave Arneson went to England, and they brought back suitcases full of these books. And
That's great.
that's where it came from. So all of the origins of stuff that we were doing
Hmm.
come out of those authors. It's like today, I still today tell people to look at those authors
Yeah.
and understand, if you want to understand where Dungeons and Dragons comes from, it doesn't come from a set of rules. It comes from a whole state of mind
Hmm.
where, Gary and all of us had read the Conan books
Yeah.
or the Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, and we applied that and we figured, why can't we take Charles Grant's rules or Tony Bath's Hyborian rules and apply them to what we're doing?
Yeah.
And I mean, I still use Tony Bath's rules. Yes, I'm putting together a campaign in the Karelian Isthmus in between Finland and Russia since
Hmm.
the spring of 1944, and I'm running the game using Tony Bath's How to Run a War Game campaign.
Hmm.
Because basically, what it is, I have mailed in players who are the high commands who
Yeah.
send in their instructions, and this in turn generates fights, which the players locally all get involved with. So on one afternoon, you could be playing the Red Army women. The next game, you could be playing the Finns. Whatever.
Yeah.
And each basically you get. What I do is I give people an envelope, and you open it up and you find out what you're playing. And that's what I did for my Great Mos Eisley Spaceport raid, which was, again, it was a Brownstein because I've been learning about Brownsteins from David Wesley.
Hmm.
And again, the influence there, the inspiration came how to run a war game campaign.
Hmm.
Because the first Brownstein, the most successful one, was devised by Wesley as a brilliant way to generate Napoleonics battles.
Yeah.
So it was a direct descendant of what the British authors were doing, and because we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wesley adapted Tony Bath, Arneson adapted Wesley, Gygax adapted Arneson,
Hmm.
and that's where we are today.
It's amazing. Uh, just how Robert E. Howard himself
Yeah,
starts off in Texas. Amazing story.
yeah,
That one's up in England. It's bad thinking. And they get you the Hyboria campaign,
yeah,
which ran for 8 years
yeah,
of this kind of gaming.
yeah.
And then that winds up this area, then
Hmm.
they apply it, changes gaming.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, because again, Phil's campaign, I was out there from spring of 1976 to the fall of 1988.
Hmm.
Every Thursday night, 7 p.m. If you didn't show up on time, you didn't get in. Just period. Phil ran. I mean, Phil actually kept attendance sheets. I have copies of his attendance sheets from 1974 where it's like Dave Arneson, Gary Gygax, Ken Fletcher. I mean, all these names,
Yeah.
and they're all there. I mean, everybody who was in gaming at that time in the Twin Cities was in, they tried the campaign. And eventually Phil's wife said, I'm not going to clean up after your filthy gamers, kicked us all out. And we wound up at the University of Minnesota Conflict Simulation. And eventually, because we offered to clean up, I was the guy who came down and mowed Barker's lawn and cleared the snow off. Humberine graciously allowed us into the kitchen. Going into the rest of the house, you took your shoes off or you died. We were all terrified of Umberine and her broom of doom.
Please tell me she swatted at you guys.
Oh yeah. We were utterly convinced that Umberine, would invoke her Pakistani forebears, grab one of the weapons off the wall, and slice us into tiny ribbons. We loved her and feared her.
As
But
it should be.
yeah, and it's just she was always a gracious hostess. And we gamed in Phil's basement.
Hmm.
And again, I was like, you talk about the British gamers. Phil was a founding member of the Society for Ancients. He
Hmm.
kept that up throughout his entire life. And that's where his cousin Phil,
Hmm.
author of the War Games Research Group, the DBX, the DBA,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever. So there was always this long, strong connection. And so those of us of a certain vintage and a certain mindset,
Hmm.
we have that British connection where it was all about, yes, we have a set of rules, but it's free Kriegspiel,
Hmm.
where we all knew how fast the unit, whether it was Macedonian pikemen or Panzer tanks, or we knew how fast it moved across the battlefield and what it had for combat power,
Yeah.
because we were all using the same books, Charles Grant and Donald Featherstone. And so we were playing Free Kriegspiel, which is what Dave did with Blackmore, where people would say, first time players would say, what do I need to roll? And Dave would say, roll and I'll tell you what happens, because he knew enough about how his world worked that he could tell you what was going to happen. It's like,
Yeah.
we knew from our time at the SCA, you whack somebody up the side of the head with a poleaxe. It's like when they dug up Richard III,
Hmm.
and they're all saying, "Well, I don't know, what did he die of?" And I looked at the skull. It's like he died of having the halberd shave off the back of his head. And while that was happening, somebody came from the other side and whacked him with a poleaxe. And it took a
Wood
year.
profile. Yeah.
Yeah, it took a year of forensic analysis to determine that somebody shaved the back of his head off with a halberd. Duh. I mean, that was the cause of death was screamingly obvious. And we all knew that because, again, we all read Featherstone and Grant and Brigadier Peter Young, who had been a commando officer during the Second World War before he moved on to the Sealed Knot and became a wargamer. So you had people who had been to see the elephant,
Yeah.
and they knew how things worked and they knew why things worked. And for a lot of that writing that they did, the why was much more important. There's a guy doing YouTube videos about. He's running audio of Peter Young talking about things. And one of the things that I do in my campaign is I remind people that you get somebody killed, they're dead. They're not coming back.
Yeah.
And so my players tend to get real cautious real quick. And I include things like the medical units so that you actually have the medics roaming the battlefield picking people up. And because I gamed with Dave Arneson, I had to have a rule: medics do not get victory points for casualties that they cause. Because otherwise you'd have Arneson whacking people over the head and taking them back to the aid station for the victory points.
He always seems to be pushing the envelope.
Arneson always pushed the envelope. Because again, he came out of the Charles Grant Featherstone Bath School, where if it is not specifically forbidden by the rules of the game, it's permitted.
Give it a shot.
Give it a shot. Give it a shot. Try it out and see what you get. Like in Brownstein 4, Arneson had forged up papers proving that he was the CIA station chief in the Banana Republic. And Wesley let him get away with it. And by the end of the game, he had stolen the treasury for the small country. When he was the student leader, what he was supposed to do was hand out these leaflets.
Mm-hmm.
And the story is, Wesley tells the story. Basically, Arneson's in the helicopter leaving with the treasury, and he's got this briefcase full of leaflets. Do I get victory points for distributing these? And Wesley goes, yeah, that was your original goal.
That's what you're going to do.
So he unlocks the briefcase and throws it out and won the game because he's distributed the leaflets.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that thinking that Featherstone, Grant, etc., did, where they encouraged people to think. Because again, this was Brigadier Peter Young's influence, where he was very big on wargaming to train junior officers. Like this, again, this is one of the Aldershot connection, where a lot of these guys, I think it was Paddy Griffith and the others, who were doing all this gaming. Paddy became an official consultant to the British Army.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the one who ran the great Sea Lion, where they brought in a lot of the World War II generals who had actually run the defense of Britain and the proposed attack in 1940, and they ran the game. And it was interesting because the Germans were able to land, but they weren't able to survive, and they basically lost an entire army having due to surrender. But again, Paddy Griffith, I mean, we all knew about this because, again, the newsletters like the Slingshot for the Ancients People, Tony Bath's Hyborian campaign, we all knew each other through each other's writings. We didn't meet each other personally until, in many cases, decades later.
Yeah.
But we all knew what everybody was up to. And so there was this huge cross fertilization that Gary tapped into. Gary's genius, which I'm right up front about, is that he was able to take whatever bizarre ideas somebody threw in his direction and turn it into a sellable, playable rule set.
Mm-hmm.
Cavaliers and Roundheads and stuff like that. I mean, his Arneson's D-Guts is still a standard Napoleonic ship game. And all this came from these guys reading all this stuff that was coming in from England. There's a lot of there's a lot of back and forth because the guys in England were just as aware of what we were doing at that time because the mail actually worked.
Yeah, Jeff Perrin and Gygax got articles into the Wargamers
Hmm.
newsletter I read about.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So again, there was this huge cross fertilization, and the British were just as aware of us as we were of them. And as a result, you had this, there was this, it's like with Dungeons and Dragons, we all knew how to adventure because we'd all read Conan and Fafhrd and the Grey
Yeah.
Mouser. We knew how the world worked. And so there wasn't any of this, oh, you have to play this character and we have to have party balance and all this other stuff that's currently in D&D. No, all you did is you sat down at the table. Like in Blackmore, you walked into the Come Back Inn or you walked into the Golden Dragon and you listened to what was going on. Because what both Arneson and Gygax did is they had half a dozen adventure scenarios thought up in their heads.
Hmm.
And it's like, Gary liked 3x5 index cards. That's where I got my love of the 3x5 index card from, was Gary.
It's great size.
Yeah, because that's what, I think it was Tony Bath who was extolling the virtues of the 3x5 index card.
Hmm.
And so, you'd be in the thing and you would overhear a conversation. And if you, the players, picked up on that, then Gary would haul out the card and we'd be off on the adventure. Same thing
Yeah,
with
here's the
Dave.
outline.
Yeah, Dave usually had them in his head. But I
Okay.
still do that where stuff goes on in the campaign. It's like I talked earlier about Phil Barker using Tony Bath's How to Run a War Game campaign. Before Phil started his Tekumel campaign, which effectively started in 1974 with the playtest version, he rolled up 1,500 player character, non-player characters. He did 1,500 index cards, and they were color coded by the religion of the person, and it gave all their statistics, and it gave
Hmm.
who they were and what they did and all the rest of it. And every quarter, I don't know if he did it every month, but I know he did it every quarter. He would sit down and he would roll on Tony Bath's tables
Hmm.
births, deaths, marriages, divorces, kids, you name it, for all 1,500 people. And
It's an
then,
undertaking.
yeah, when you walked into a city, like we go into Kirgar, we ask about the, high priest of the Temple of Karakan, who we know, Phil would pull out the, look at, oh, he's been transferred. He got a promotion. He's now the high priest in Besu, the capital. And what Phil would do is he would physically, after doing all these dice rolls, he would physically move the index cards between the boxes that represented the empires and put them in behind the tab that represented the particular city.
Hmm.
So his Phil's Tekumel campaign, it was a living world. And the world went on without us because if we weren't there playing,
Yeah.
then stuff would happen around us.
Yeah. Time advanced.
Exactly. And that's what Tony did in his Iborian campaign. That's what I do in my campaign. If
Hmm.
you, the player, do not issue orders, your unit sits there on its thumbs.
Hmm.
And there, because what I do is I use Tony's rules. And so somebody can be, I'm going down this road from point A to point B at this time. And then oh, well, great. The other side has put an ambush party. So you can do things like you can pick up the other player, the general, because again, they're all represented by miniatures. They all have staff cars.
Yeah.
And again, it's all Tony Bath's rules, Featherstone, Grant, and all the rest of these people. And it works. And people seem to really like it when I run these games
Hmm.
because I tell them right up front, the only reason you're rolling dice is a success or failure, because that's what Arneson said.
Hmm.
Because the whole thing in the British rule set mentality is that you're not rolling against statistics. Make a saving throw against your dexterity kind of thing. No, you're rolling success or failure, and your dexterity, for example, you're picking a lock, and your dexterity is like 90. Okay, that's a 90% chance of success. And so
Yeah.
you'd roll and you'd get like ought one. And Dave would say, well, you failed because that's the way the British school works,
Hmm.
because it's like, these days, I mean, I watch all of this incredible dice rolling and falderall and singing and dancing and throwing up,
Hmm.
and it drives me crazy because everybody is so fixated on the rules mechanics
Hmm.
that they lose sight of the fact that your Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser or your Conan and Bellet or any of these other people, there's the Grant and Featherstone and Bath crowd was much more interested in you are playing, the Panzer officer Hauptmann von Braunschweiger, the
Hmm.
guy I had in the campaign we were running. And Captain Braunschweiger was always getting into trouble because he was being ambushed by the Brits. The Brits actually were played by some really good people. But again, it was all about the adventuring, as Mike
Hmm.
Bernard has pointed out with the Tractics games that he plays in at GaryCon. There's a really thin line between you're running a platoon of three T-34 tanks or you're Sergeant Ivanov trying to figure out what the lieutenant is up to now.
Yeah.
And that's where role playing comes from because instead of saying, okay, I'm going to run my three tanks, it's I'm going to be Sergeant Ivanov in Tank 4 trying to figure out what the hell we're supposed to do now. That's where role playing comes from. So literally, we are the literal descendants of Peter Young, Tony Bath, Featherstone, Grant, and the rest of those people, because that's where the whole notion, like in the Hyboria campaign that Tony Bath was doing, the role playing part eventually came to displace the miniatures part because people were so excited about playing the Voivode of Rus that they played the Voivode of Rus. And it's like I did that in Phil Barker's campaign, which led to, it's like the Princess Reese's of Westmore. That you've still got all the video from that, so you can show, cut those in.
Yeah, yeah.
But basically, the other group, Phil's other group, tried to have Kathy Marshall's character arrested, and I turned him away, saying, "Get a warrant." And Phil went off and pouted for 2 weeks and came back with this absolutely gorgeous document. I looked it over and said, Risa, you're under arrest, and handed it to her so she could read it. And she's looking, okay, your tent or mine. And Phil's looking at us like, and I then turned and I chewed him out. I said,
Yeah.
Phil, if you had been properly doing this, your scribes would have had this all ready to present the warrant. You punted it. And we would have saved 2 weeks of you pouting and fulminating about, this was about this. And he took a cigar. He used to smoke these horrible little cigarillos. And he took the cigar out of his mouth, looked at me, and said, Chirne, you've gone native in his
Right.
world
Yeah,
that he'd
yeah.
created and been working on since the 1940s.
Mhm.
And that was the objective of the game. When you sat down to play WRG 6th edition, you were playing Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great or one of the generals.
Yeah.
And you were, again, the British school that we came out of was get into the mindset of the character that you're playing, whether, one of the Ptolemies or somebody like that, because it adds to the depth of the game, it adds to the fun of the game. Because again, the whole purpose of this, the Hyborian campaign was an excuse for a bunch of Tony Bath and his friends to get together over tea and cakes and push lead around the table. The social aspect was very important. Back in the day, what we would do is we'd get together, you'd show up at, say, Arneson's at 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
You'd game for 4 or 5 hours straight. His mom would bring down plates of sandwiches and stuff like that. And then you would game again from like 6 o'clock to midnight because it was a bunch of friends sitting around a table laughing their fool heads off. And occasionally we'd roll dice and push lead. But it was all about the friendship, all about the camaraderie because we were all having fun. Because one of the things I learned from both Gary and Dave was that if somebody wants to play, they get a seat at the table. Period.
Yeah.
End of sentence. And that came down to like Fred Funk running his campaign. If you walked in and all 12 chairs at Fred's game were full, Fred would get up and go get you a chair and bring it in so you could sit down and play. He would hand you dice, whatever. See, because what we did is like, it's like that's why I got this huge box of dice.
Yeah.
All this stuff comes out at the game session. So if somebody doesn't own a particular pair of dice, I can hand it to them. I've actually got, these smaller dice are what I use for gaming at a table like this, but I've got big dice for a 4x8 table so everybody at the table can see the rolls. And again, that comes out of what I call the showmanship aspect that Peter Young, Bath, and all those other people brought to their games. It's like you still see that, like at Salute that just came by. Game clubs will basically spend a year building their demo game for a convention, and they will do things like you will have a 15-foot by 8-foot game table that you're playing on, which is the Siege of Teotihuacan, the night the Spaniards tried to take the place. And you walk in the room, and there you see your 4-foot tall Aztec temple. Because basically, again, it's the social aspect where Grant, for example, did a lot of conversion articles in the War Games magazine saying how to convert your Rocco Panzer IV into your Westby or Hummel or something like that, because there's a billion different varieties of what was built on that chassis. And so you'd be sitting there fiddling around with your index cards and washers and tubing, making things for the game. I mean, I still do that. I'm currently working on a bunch of buildings for this game I'm putting together for my daughter Alice, which is she wants games with dad. And so she wants something non-confrontational. So she and her players are playing the fire department. And their objective is to keep the town from burning down. Real simple,
Yep.
real
Hmm.
easy. And I'm building the buildings. I mean, we had a debate whether or not we wanted an 8-story building because my little die-cast fire trucks, the turntable ladder, not only elevates and swivels 360 degrees, it extends out to 24 inches on the table.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's playability. And this is something that the British had, which Arneson adopted whole hog. It's like when somebody said, "What does Blackmore Castle look like?" Phil went out to one of the woodcraft hobbies here in town, and he got the Pola castle. The actual castle still exists.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I introduced to a lot of people is you can still buy Blackmore Castle. It's still available from Pola in Germany. It runs you
Yeah.
about $50, but it's
Worth
what
every dime.
Arneson used. Yeah.
Hmm.
And again, we did that. The original Brownstein was David Wesley going out and cleaning out all the local hobby stores. The reason why it was set in Germany is because that's where all the buildings came from at that time.
Yeah.
Pola and other companies. And so that's why Brownstein has all of these German half-timbered buildings.
Hmm.
And again, this comes from the photographs we saw of these guys in Britain's games, which were visually spectacular. The idea of a battle mat and half a dozen figures, they would have looked at you funny and said, "That's great, but that's a map-based game. That's effectively a board game. What we're playing here is miniatures." It's like one of the big names in miniatures gaming at that time was the guy who played Grand Moff Tarkin in Star Wars.
Oh, yes. He's got a fantastic
Yeah,
short bit from
yeah,
British Pathé.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Peter Cushing.
yeah, Peter Cushing, whose good friend Christopher Lee had just finished the
Yes.
Second World War. It's like when they were
Hmm.
shooting Lord of the Rings, and the director said, "Well, okay, make this noise, for somebody being stabbed." And Christopher Lee stopped and said, "That's not the noise a man makes when he's stabbed in the back." "Well, how do you know?" "Well, I was in the special operations executive during the Second World War," and he left it at that. And people realized that he was there, and to this day, nobody knows if he did it himself. He claims that, well, all I was an intelligence analyst. I was a file clerk.
Wink, wink.
Yeah, because it's like, and somebody once said, "Christopher, what did you do in the war?" And he says, "Well, can you keep a secret?" "Yeah, good. So can I."
He was on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah, and it's he was a member of the Special Forces Club in Britain. He's one of the founding members, and he was given honorary basically memberships in all the Special Forces clubs in the world.
Hmm.
And there was one really, because he would basically pull out his cards, and it would be fanned out. It would be every special operations unit in the entire world, including the Soviets. Yeah, he was that highly regarded. And David Niven, for example, was an officer. He was a colonel in what they called the Phantom Regiment, which was a special operations organization.
Hmm.
And as he put to one of his, there's a quote from his biography. Before he went off on a mission, he told his guys, "We have to get this right. This is going to be really easy for you, but I'm going to have to do it again with Errol Flynn in Hollywood in 5 years." So
I feel kind of bad. I've never really watched Errol Flynn myself. I got to get into
you
him.
should,
Hmm.
because I mean, Fairbanks, the Fairbanks father and son.
Hmm.
You really need to watch those movies because that's where a lot of the British approach and the Arneson approach and the Gygax approach, we all knew how to do things. We all knew how to ambush the party in the wood because we'd all seen Robin Hood with Errol Flynn.
Yeah.
So we knew how to do these things.
Hmm.
There wasn't any of those consult the table, line 36, paragraph 24, fart
Uh,
3 times and spin around.
so I hate this phrase because it's modern, but it
Yeah.
does kind of help media literacy.
Yes.
At least sitting down,
Yes.
you've seen the movie,
Yep.
do that.
Yeah, one of the things that really frustrates me, which is why I do not do public games much
Hmm.
anymore. I know it's like Mike Bernard refuses to run D&D at GaryCon because of
Hmm.
this problem. You have people who grew up with the set of rules,
Hmm.
and their attitude is that, well, if it's not allowed in the rules, I can't do it.
Sure.
Yes, if you're approaching it like that, you will never swing across the Death Star trench with some dental floss.
Hmm.
Because again, Star Wars is pulp. It is straight
Yes.
up. 1930s, 1940s, 1950s pulp, and that's where we come from. Because it's like people ask me, well, where did Dave Arneson get his inspiration for D&D? And my response is Mel Jass's matinee movie. There was the independent station in town, 11, and they had a guy who ran the matinee movie. Because back in the day, when we only had three television networks,
Hmm.
the network would shut off at a certain time after they ran the national news. And so the station had all this dead air on Saturday afternoon because you had the Saturday morning cartoons from the network, and then they'd do the noon news,
Yeah.
and then everybody would shut down. Well, a dead transmitter isn't making you any money. So what you would get is you would be able to buy these film packages from studios. You had
Hmm.
a machine called a telecine. I think I am one of the last telecine operators in the Twin Cities.
Oh my gosh.
And basically, you put your film spool on there, and you had
Hmm.
two of these machines in the tape room. And you basically, this is back really, videotape used to be 2 inches wide
Yeah.
and huge platters, and you had a 1 hour on the tape, and your job was to run the telecine, you run the film, and then at the half hour mark you would stop, and Mel Jass would do an advertisement for a local car dealership or something, because that was what paid for the transmitter. It's what
Right.
paid brought
Yeah.
money into the station. And so you would get things like Japanese monster movies where people in rubber suits destroy a miniature Tokyo,
Hmm.
or you had Hercules, Son of Zeus. You had all of the sword and sandal movies.
Yeah.
You know, we knew what to do when captured by the evil high priest because we'd all watched Mel Jass matinee movies.
Hmm.
And Gary had the same thing with the Chicago stations down in Lake Geneva, where they did the exact same thing. And for literally decades, until the networks wised up and figured they could sell commercial time on Saturday afternoons,
Hmm.
you had this steady diet of all of these movies, which again, Hammer horror, which is where the British, Grant and all the rest of those guys, they knew what happens when Dracula bites you in the neck.
Yeah.
Okay, because we watched Christopher Lee going around biting people in the neck when being chased around by his good friend Peter Cushing, who was going to drive the stake through his heart.
I have seen some of those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hammer horror. I mean, again, it's pulp, and the pulp antecedents. Again, we got. I mean, we all watched the British Hammer horror
Hmm.
movies. We were all had the same media literacy that doesn't exist anymore. Because I
Yeah.
will talk to people who want to play D&D,
Hmm.
and they have no idea what I'm talking about when I'm
Yeah.
talking about adventuring.
Okay, I've got a better word there. I'm just going to call it culture now
Yeah,
because it is something worth reading
right,
and thinking about to then apply it somewhere
right.
else. I think that's cultivation, in
Yeah,
my opinion.
yeah. In my experience, people don't read books anymore. I have a
Correct.
huge library downstairs because one of the things I very deliberately did in my game room in my basement is we went over to Barker's, and one of the great privileges, you knew you had finally arrived when Phil allowed you up in his third floor office.
Hmm.
He had something like 8,000 books in that collection. He had a huge Islamic collection. One of the coolest things I have ever had happen to me in my life is Phil said, hold your hands out like this.
Hmm.
And I did. And he puts this little book about the size of a paperback book, but about this thick in my hands. And he very carefully opens the golden encrusted page covers, and he starts turning the pages. And the pages of this book are the purest white you can imagine with the blackest ink you can imagine. I'm holding a Quran from about 1400, and he's turning the pages very gently because they're made of sheets of ivory. And it's been written in squid ink, and he said it came from Qatar and was written about sometime around 1400.
I'm sorry, that book was before the fall of Constantinople.
1453, Constantinople.
Yeah.
I happen to be Byzantine Orthodox, which is why I wear my
Hmm.
Fort Ross cross. But I held things. Phil had stuff in his collection. When he went to India with a Fulbright scholarship,
Hmm.
they'd have a riot. And Phil would amble down to the police station the next day and have tea and cakes with the police chief, very British way of doing things.
Hmm.
And they would say, "Ah, Barker Sahib," because they're all speaking the same language. "We have all this stuff that we collected off of the rioters yesterday." And they would bring in this collection of Indo-Persian weaponry from the 1400s on.
Hmm.
I mean, the pride of my collection is a bouge. It's the axe knife that elephant mahouts carried. Phil used to call it the elephant prod.
Hmm.
And I got that because back in 75, one of Phil's players saw that, and that was her personal weapon. My job, in addition to all the other stuff I did for Phil, was I cleaned everything up, and
Yeah.
cleaned that thing up so it just gleamed, and that was her personal weapon. And he said
Hmm.
one of the cool things about it is not only does it's about this long, it's got a blade on this end, but you unscrew the pommel and you got a dagger. All this stuff was real.
Yes. Hmm.
Phil got a lot of heat over the decades for how his weapons on Tekumel looked.
Hmm.
They're all there. They were all hanging up in the dining room on the
Yeah.
plate rail. And one of the things I made sure to do after he passed away and the collection went to Chris Poor of Arms and Armor to be sold, I photographed everything,
Hmm.
you know, and I did get the bouge. He, Chris got it to me at a hugely reduced price because it was a family item. And it was the
Yeah.
only item in Phil's entire collection that had any direct connection with Tekumel, which is why I wanted it
Hmm.
for my archives.
Yeah.
But
You
I
said it
have,
was 75.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But I have all these books that basically it mirrors Phil's library with the breadth of everything. I mean, he had a book on Tutankhamun's underwear. Somebody actually sat down and wrote a book on all of Tutankhamun's underwear that they found in his tomb.
I have to make an academic joke here
Mm,
because anymore you've got people making books out of footnotes.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, Phil had a copy, and that was the world he came from, and it was
Hmm.
all of the authors that we've talked about, and Phil brought an awful lot of that British approach
Hmm.
to his game. I mean, like I say, he was running Tony Bath's rules starting in 1974,
Hmm.
and he kept on doing it until about 2008.
Yeah. If we could focus more on Tekamel with the
Sure.
time that's remaining. So we're effectively South Asia and having a good time.
Yeah, it's Phil's modern Tekamel is basically the Mughal Empire in
Hmm.
Mughal India,
Hmm.
with heavy elements of Mesoamerica thrown in because Phil was originally going to be a Mesoamerican anthropologist before he switched over to being a linguist.
Hmm.
And so what astonished Gary and Dave about Tekamel was that Phil could write good rules that were very organized. Because you look at the original 3 volume set, it's Gary and Dave's house rules and it's incredibly disorganized. It's hard to work with.
Hmm.
Phil took a copy of that and basically organized things up. He used a lot of Dave Arneson's mechanics and a lot of Gary's suggestions, but we lived in an alien world.
Hmm.
If you think of what Tekamel really is pulp science fiction, where you take the Minneapolis St. Paul airport terminal with all of the passengers going through and dump it in a pocket dimension.
Hmm.
And that's where all the different people on Tekamel, Gary insisted using the word races because that was what was in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
No, it's all the different species
Hmm.
because all humans on Tekamel are pretty much the same because this is set 300,000 years in our future. And so you don't get a lot of the divisions that you have now. And what it is that it's what happens after civilization collapses and it slowly comes back. It is
Hmm.
pulp science fiction. And if you go back through and you look at the pulp covers from those days, because Phil
Yeah.
was very, very active in science fiction fandom, you will see all the creatures on Tekamel.
Really?
Yeah, they're all there.
Even that weird stuff from Jack Vance?
Yep. Phil was a good friend of Jack Vance.
Wait, really?
Yes, the very first maps of the dying Earth were drawn by Phil Barker for Jack Vance.
It's incredible. I only started reading Vance in the last year or
Mhm.
so.
Yeah. Phil knew everybody in 1950s fandom,
Hmm.
1950s science fiction. He had his 1950 Worldcon program books, and first name at the top is E. E. Doc Smith from the Lensman series.
Hmm.
And people were saying, well, what's the whole thing, the chaos and order on Tekamel? And I said, it's Boscones versus Arisians.
Hmm.
What? Yeah. You look at it carefully and you read it, and then you go back and you look at the
Hmm.
Lensman series. Phil lifted the Lensman series
Yeah.
because for years we thought we were the good guys because we were fighting for the Eurasians.
Hmm.
But the forces actually they're trying to bring Tekamel back into normal space were the Boscones, who are actually the good guys. That's like people. I had an incident one with again Phil's world was so different. I had an incident where I was getting my butt chewed off at a Gen Con for being an evil high priest. My character, Trina Bacall, is a
Hmm.
priest of the Temple of Amukla, and
Hmm.
by definition in D&D, he's an evil high priest.
Okay.
And So I was getting chewed out by a bunch of D&D fans for this. And I'm thinking, I'm standing here in my armor. This is probably not the best thing. I have my own suit of armor that I built,
Hmm.
Cherney's armor, 38 pounds of steel and leather, armed to the teeth. And typical player characters, the weapons loadout on Cherney looks like something on a bomber or
Yeah.
something. And I'm getting chewed out, and this guy walking by turns around and says, "No, Cherney is a paladin because he believes in his faith, he acts according to his faith, and thus he is a paladin."
Hmm.
And like, well, who the heck do you know? Or what do you know? It was Gary. I'm the first anti-paladin
Hmm.
because I act according to the tenets of my faith
Yeah.
and I do the right thing. I feed the hungry, I heal the sick, I house the homeless, and sacrifice enemy warriors to my God. That's what we do. Because Phil brought us, it's people had a hard time with Tekumel and still do
Hmm.
because it is nobody knows much of anything about South Asia.
Yeah.
And we learned all about it. I can still point out to you the cities that Phil visited. If you go through his cities on his World of Tekamel, it follows Phil path traveling around India. Like I
Hmm.
was governor of the city of Hikalu for a while. That's Udaipur. If
Hmm.
you want to see what my city looked like on Tekamel, watch the James Bond movie Octopussy. It's
Yes.
the city on the lake. I even have the barge.
Hmm.
Different crew, but I have the barge. Or Fasultum, the city of the chiming skulls. That's Jaipur.
Hmm.
And it basically Phil had been to these places. So he would say, well, you go in the main gate, go up 3 blocks, turn to your left, go 1 block, and there's a really great place to eat because he'd been there. One of the absolutely coolest evenings we had, Kathy Marshall, Princess Risa wanted to go shopping
Hmm.
in the marketplace, so we did. And I went out to, there's a gem show here in the Twin Cities every year that's attended by a lot of ladies from South Asia.
Hmm.
You get the mothers, the aunties, the grandmothers, the 6-year-old girls, and we men folks standing around looking like nitwits because we're the ones who are holding the luggage. We get absolutely
Yeah.
no vote in any of this stuff. And so you have this tremendous collection of voices, and it's what Phil brought. I mean, the sad thing about Tecumel is that Phil could never write the way he told stories
Hmm.
because Phil made India come alive for us. The only other person who made India come alive that way was Rudyard Kipling. And if you want to understand what Tecumel gaming was like for us playing in Phil's campaign, read books like Kim or the collected works of Rudyard Kipling, and
Hmm.
it gives you that same sensation of place and time. It wasn't for everybody because we were not dealing with the standard Renaissance Festival D&D world. We were in a
Hmm.
living world that was totally alien because you got to remember this is 1975. We're all Americans.
Hmm.
We have no idea. We sort of know where India is, but we have no real grasp. This is before, immigrants and the rest of it. And
Sure.
Phil basically explained to us. So it's like, in a lot of stuff that happened in the Cold War, like the Russians in Afghanistan and stuff, I knew what was going on because Phil had been to Afghanistan.
Hmm.
And I mean, he spoke 47 languages. I once asked him,
Yeah.
Phil, how many languages do you speak? And he started doing this Belushi finger counting thing. And he finally said, that his standard was because he pass as a native in that language. And I said, yeah, that sounds good. He said 47 languages. He spoke Pashtun, Pashto, Hindi, everything. So he could literally, I mean, he told me a story about he was going out to do some studies and he showed up, got off the bus, and all the men folk of the village are waiting for him, led by the village elders down to like the 6-year-old boy.
Hmm.
And so he has his suitcase. Oh, Barker Sahib, let us take your suitcase. And before Phil could do anything, they open up his suitcase, and every man in the village, down to a 6-year-old boy,
Hmm.
the bearer of the Barker Sahib's toothbrush.
Hmm.
And this procession sets off to the village. And they arrive at the house where Phil is going to stay. And each of these people presents to the lady of the house, who then directs all of the females of the village. So you have this little 6-year-old girl who becomes the bearer of the Sahib's toothbrush. Phil goes into his room, and there are his suitcases, and they're all packed exactly the way he had packed them himself. They put
Hmm.
everything back, and that was the way the world worked. When we walked into a village, someplace on Tekumel, that is what greeted us because we were the big important people from the big city. And we learned instantly how to deal with people, which is why we stayed alive.
Hmm.
I mean, the other people in the other group didn't do that. Read Gary Fine's book, Shared Fantasy, for what the other group was like.
Okay.
But we were there and we were right up front. We wanted to explore Tekumel, and we did. And what happened was is that when I got hired by Dave Arneson at Phil's request to be Phil's publisher, all of the stuff we did in our gaming group got written up in our fanzines, the Journal of Tekumel Affairs, the Imperial Military Journal, and that's how we got the news out about the campaign. We were deliberately emulating Tony Bath's Hyborian campaign.
Hmm. Is it the Shadowstar Herald there?
Yep, that's
Hmm.
it. That's it. And that was the goal. We all wanted to be Tony Bath and Charles Featherstone so bad our teeth hurt. And we had a lot of fun doing it, but it was an alien world.
Yeah.
It's got descendants, Sky Realms of Jorun and Harn. The guys who did those very deliberately modeled their stuff because at the time, both Gary and Dave said to me at various times they wish they had written it. And they
Hmm.
were so impressed by it because it set out the first clearly established, unique world.
Hmm.
It's got a lot more fantasy elements in Empire of the Petal Throne because Gary wanted them there because he figured it would appeal better to the D&D players. And he must have done something right because I came across a letter from Kevin Bloom to Phil. The first 1,000 copies of Empire of the Petal Throne in 1975 at $25 for each box set sold 1,000 copies in 3 months. They printed up 5,000 more. Those sold out in 6 months. They printed up another 1,000 for a total run of 11,000 copies. That sold all but about 400 copies in 6 months. EPT actually outsold Dungeons and Dragons.
And people liked it as a
Yes,
specialty product. What all was in the box?
you had the book,
Hmm.
you had some cheat sheets and things like that. You also had 3 maps that, see, Phil had, as a kid, had worked for his dad in a lithography shop in Washington. So
Hmm.
Phil did his own color separations. So what TSR got was literally a camera-ready package to go to their printer. Their printer had a material that could only be described as Tyvek. It was this very heavy-duty plastic sheeting, and that's what they printed the EPT maps on.
Hmm.
And they were, I mean, they literally set the standard for maps for the rest of the history of gaming. They have
Yeah.
yet to be surpassed 50 years later.
There's a much
And when
later
you got
series.
a pair of percentile dice in there too.
Yeah, the Bastaro series from the late 80s. The
Hmm.
Gazetteers have these maps in the back of them. I love
Right,
collecting those myself.
right.
Hmm.
And so that's what you got. And you could sit down and with about an hour's worth of work, you could run a perfectly acceptable Tekumel game
Hmm.
from just Empire of the Petal Throne. It's like people
Yeah.
say, well, do I need to get all this stuff? My answer is no.
Right. Do I
I
need to know the language before playing the game?
Yeah, you do not need to speak the language because everybody assumes we all spoke Soliani at the table. No, we did not. Yes, I am literate in Soliani. I speak
Hmm.
Soliani goodest, but we didn't have to do that at the table. Phil would often drop Soliani terms, and for example, Chirne, pass the Vayunlu.
Hmm.
The Vayunlu is the device that creates the state of openness. It's a can opener. It's what you use
Oh,
to open the bottles of
it's
soda
gonna be
pop.
opium.
Yeah. No, pass the Vayunlu.
Uh-huh.
The device for the creation of the state of openness.
Hmm.
And we had a lot of fun with it because we explored the world. And every time we would do something, I kept a journal book from 1976 to 1988,
Hmm.
which is the source for my book to serve the Petal Throne, my adventures on Tekumel. And basically, what we did on a Thursday night would be written up the next Monday at Tekumel night at my place, and that was what would go out in all the publications. The publications I did for Arneson. We, for a decade, were Phil's publishers because the way the table was set up, you'd have Phil's ping pong table that he covered with green carpet for miniatures gaming. The active players, 4 guys would sit on this side, 4 people, I should say. The artist would sit on this side, Ken Fletcher, who you met today,
Yes.
Kathy Marshall, all the rest of it. I would sit down at the end of the table with the archives. I'd be the collective memory of the group.
Hmm.
Phil would actually, in the middle of a game, he would come to a blank wall. He'd pass me a note saying, "What the heck's going on?" And I would pass the note back saying, "Page 56," because I was Phil's memory. Because I have a really good, I'm told what I have is an eidetic memory. If I read
Yeah.
something, it's in permanent memory storage.
Hmm.
So I would do that for Phil. And so what he would do is he would divert somebody with a story about how he was abducted by pirates in Kerala. And then he was released when they discovered that he was the famous Barker Sahib.
Hmm.
Phil was a tremendous storyteller. And for us, Tekumel was a living, breathing world that was totally alien. Not because it had lizard people and all the other different creatures, but because Phil knew when I did his memorial event at the Islamic Center in the Twin Cities, people are walking in the door and I recognized them instantly
Mm-hmm.
because Phil used them as characters in the campaign and I recognized them from Phil's descriptions or his artwork because he was a prolific artist. He first started doing the artwork for Tekamel in the 1950s, which is where a lot of the drawings from EPT come from. And then after that, Ken Fletcher and Kathy Marshall really set the tone with their artwork of what the place looked like.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, what happened was is that somebody would generate some artwork or Phil would generate something. It would come down the table to me. I would photocopy it at my job on Friday and then bring it back to Phil the next Thursday and it would go into his permanent collection, which I was the curator of. And then I have it. That's where my archives come from. Is I literally have on file everything Phil Barker ever did for Tekamel. And we have 32 gigabytes of text. We have 36 gigabytes of artwork. And literally, it's just Phil had this world because it was the world he knew
Mm-hmm.
and had been to in South Asia. And so, I mean, and he drew on that, the cultures, the costumes that people wore, the belief systems. And he wrote a book. He wrote an article that they published in, I think it was the Strategic Review of creating religions for fun and profit, which was basically his take on how religions are put together and organized, because he had
Mm-hmm.
a much, much, much broader database than any of us did.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us, we had a couple of Catholics in the group. We had mostly, Protestants. Later on, we had some neo-pagans. But from the beginning, we had anybody who wanted to share at the table. All of our gaming groups were at least 30% women
Mm-hmm.
from the very first days.
Now hold on, I'm told women didn't play these games back in the day.
Well, somebody better tell us that because every game, I mean, we played, there was at least three or four women playing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Would you say they played any differently than the men? I know it's a weird
no,
question.
no.
Uh-huh.
The philosophy we had was that we will give you, the new player, every opportunity to learn. But once we think you're as good as we are,
Mm-hmm.
we will tear your heart out and feed it to you with Tabasco sauce on it. And they played just as hard and just as well
Yeah.
as anybody else. I mean, Kathy Marshall's Princess Risa character was my mercenary guard because I'm a sorcerer. I'm actually off the charts in Empire of the Pearl Throne. I'm 10th circle, 10th level. And she was there to keep people from bashing me in the head with a rock while I was busy spellcasting.
Mm-hmm.
And she was lethally efficient. Kathy has always been a really good player, very, very skilled, very, very adept. She played all sorts of stuff. Somebody made the mistake of going up against Kathy in a World War II game, and she ate them for lunch. Well,
It's awesome.
I'm playing a woman, and she cut them to ribbons. It was hysterical. The running joke is, yeah, Kathy machine gunned the swamp until it stopped screaming. But we had women, we had people of color if they wanted to play.
Yeah.
Phil was very much everybody gets a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Gary and Dave were, because again, that was the British approach. Because I mean, they were all right up front. Everybody gets a seat at the table. We
Yeah.
all played. The British population was more diverse than ours was. We're talking Minnesota in the 1970s,
Mm-hmm.
and so you had a very sort of under. It was even worse down in Lake Geneva. Gary once told me. But if you wanted to play, you played. And all this stuff about, well, women can't be good gamers, that's a load of horsepucky. I've had my
Mm-hmm.
butt shot off by female players more times than I care to think about because they're really good. They're there because they want to be there,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to excel because they want to be there. Women player characters are usually more motivated than male players are. I would,
Really?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because they want to be there and they are going to demonstrate that they can play. It's like my daughters have all played in my game campaigns,
Mm-hmm.
and they have all been in the top tier of gamers because they've studied Tekumel, they understand Tekumel, and they spend a lot of time, trouble, and effort learning the rules, not of the game, but of the society.
Mm-hmm.
Because Phil played a very social game where we learned very, very quickly who not to cheese off, and we learned how to play, and we played, and it was, Yeah, again, I look at, some of the controversies in modern gaming these days. How are we doing?
Nope. I was just gonna slightly change the frame here to keep you in it.
Okay, sorry.
You got a few minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah.
But again, it's just I see so many of the stuff go by. I actually got my butt chewed for helping a women's gaming group here in the Twin
Oh.
Cities. A person I knew wanted to run the Night Witches role-playing game, which is not the
Mhm.
world's greatest role-playing game,
Sure.
but I brought in a bunch of my stuff so they could actually go and drop bombs on people they didn't like. And they really enjoyed it. I played Arnisonian, Free Krieg Spiel,
Yeah.
Tony Bath and all the rest of it, and they really enjoyed it. But the hassle from other, the manly men
Yeah.
historical players, it eventually fractured the group
Hmm.
because people got so tired of the hassles that they were getting. 'Cause like Warhammer, there's a lady in England, Annie Norman, Bad Squiddo Games,
Hmm.
who does miniatures. And these are the figures that she wanted to buy when she was 10 years old. And what she does is sensibly dressed female figures doing what they do. And
Hmm.
she's got this incredible range. She's now, 10 years later now, she just celebrated her 10th anniversary as a miniatures company. We back all of her Kickstarters, and the figures are great. She actually has the best sculptors in the world standing in line to do figures for her.
She has a
Yeah,
wait list.
yeah, she has a wait
Wow.
list. Yeah, because she comes up with these figures, and it's like Kevin White, who is Britain's answer to Tom Meyer of Ralpartha,
Hmm.
was after her for years to do miniatures for her, and he did her Joan of Arc figure and a couple of others. Really, really, he did the Mata Hari figure,
Hmm.
which is arguably one of the finest miniatures I've ever gotten in my life. I'm afraid to paint it because it is so crisply detailed.
Uh-huh.
He modeled Mata Hari in one of her dance poses, and it is possibly one of the coolest figures I've ever seen in my life.
To look it up.
Yeah, but yeah, www.badsquiddo. That was originally, she was Annie the dice bag lady, and she got carpal tunnel syndrome and had to stop knitting up dice bags.
Hmm.
But I mean, she's done two of the limited edition Salute figures, and there's what we call ourselves is Annie's Army.
Hmm.
There's about 750 British gamers who will show up at conventions and be Annie's people, and they volunteer. Nobody gets paid for this
Yeah.
because we enjoy what she does. We love the figures, and we want to see her succeed.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, she's gotten hassles. Her Red Army women from World War II, that's a fantasy line. Well, somebody better go tell the Russians.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, a lot of the stuff I go by in today's gaming, I'm very disappointed by because there's this
Hmm.
emphasis on rules mechanics. I actually got kicked out of Burl Zorin's D&D campaign
What?
for not having system mastery. We were playing Blackmore,
Oh,
and
no.
Burl invited me to play.
Uh-huh.
We had a couple of game sessions. I was playing Cherenay, and this guy chewed my butt for not memorizing 935 pages of rules for D&D 5th edition. He was a big wheel in Adventurers League.
Hmm.
And I said, you're absolutely right. Because I would say to Burl, okay, here's what I roll. Because we basically, Burl wanted me to bring the artisan perspective into it. And this guy chewed
Sure.
my butt. And
Really?
yeah. And so I said, great, I'm sorry. Handed my sheets to Burl and I said, have fun with this. And there was this dead silence around the table until finally somebody said, do you realize who you just kicked out of this campaign?
Hmm.
No, he's not an Adventurers
Good
League
Lord.
player. No, but he was one of the Blackmore players with Dave Arneson. This is his world. What? They eventually kicked the guy out of the store
Yeah.
because he did this to far too many players. He was a really huge negative
Hmm.
influence on people
Yeah.
playing the game.
Um,
But
I'd
yeah,
like to know on a story you told me that I just keep thinking about. How did you trade Dave Arneson for some dancing women?
oh, okay, this is Dallas Origins, and we had our booth. What Dave would do is allow my Tekumel stuff to be on one table.
Hmm.
His guys would sell the Adventure Games main line off of their table. That's how I introduced Tom Clancy to Larry Bond.
I'm sorry, you say Tom Clancy?
Yeah, Tom Clancy.
The Tom Clancy.
The Tom Clancy. I'm sitting there at Origins in Baltimore, and Commander Larry
Hmm.
Larry Bond, is just written this game called Harpoon, Modern Naval Warfare.
Hmm.
And we were in hysterics because we got a call from the game store in Silver Spring, Maryland, that the Soviet naval attaché had showed up and wanted 12 copies of Harpoon
Hmm.
because the U.S. Navy had just adopted Harpoon as its standard training game for ROTC cadets.
Yeah.
So that's how we won the Cold War. Because what we did is we said, no problem, we'll have that shipped off to you tomorrow, UPS. Fired up the typesetting machine, got 12 copies of Harpoon off of the shelf, tore the shrink wrapped off, took out the statistics sheets, and threw them away. We then typeset up new statistics sheets that had all of the NATO American stuff half as good as it really was, and
Hmm.
all of the Soviet Warsaw Pact stuff twice as good as it really was.
That's brilliant.
Printed them off, shrink wrapped it up, and sent it off.
Hmm.
So I had a sign saying, Harpoon, official naval water game of Franz Academy in Moscow. And Arneson went berserk. He's like, you can't say that. I said, but it's true. So I'm sitting there, and Larry's about to run a game, and I'm busy painting up a whole bunch of the CNC ships. And I'm doing things like I'm putting helicopter pad rings on the Kiev and Moskva. And this sort of stockbroker, nerdy, wordy guy comes up and says, "Hi, is Commander Bond here?" I said, "Why, yes. As a matter of fact, he is. He's going to be running a game over there. Would you like to talk to him?" He goes, "Yeah, I'd like to." So I stand up on the chair like this, and I scream across this gymnasium, "Hey, one of your rabid fanboys is here to see you." Get down and say, "May I have your name, sir, that I may properly introduce you?" "Oh yeah, I'm Tom Clancy."
Wow.
And that's why I have an
Yeah, I read his
author's
books when I was in high school.
Yeah, I have an author's proof copy, first edition of Hunt for Red October that he signed for me. And he and Larry went on to write books like Red Storm Rising.
Hmm.
So anyway, so we're at Origins, and I'm sitting there. I've got Phil's Temple of Amukla model. I'm in my armor, 38 pounds of steel and leather, and looking
Hmm.
really studly, if I
Yeah.
do say so
Hmm.
myself. There's a booth across the way where the guys are trying to sell D&D adventures. And one of the guys has persuaded his girlfriend, who I will call Miss White, to dress up as the typical D&D dancing girl. So
Hmm.
she's got some wisps of taffeta draped
Yes.
all over her. And her job was to undulate to try and attract attention. Well, she didn't want to do this by herself. So she got two of her friends, Miss Gold and Miss Green, to do. So you have these three young ladies,
Hmm.
all in their wisps of taffeta, frantically undulating. Okay. And the mobs of gamers are thundering past them in rabid herds because
Uh-huh.
there's a display booth next door where a guy is demonstrating the Dragon Bone dice simulator. It's a piece of PVC pipe with some circuitry in it.
Hmm.
That was Thursday. Friday morning, the dancing girls mutinied, and they told their quote, hirers that they were going to go over to my side of the aisle and hang out with me because I was getting all the good business.
Yeah.
So I had the three dancing girls come over, and they said, "We want to work for you because you're getting all the trade." And I said, "Well, that's fine, but it's Dave Arneson's booth." So, Dave came over and said, "Well, okay, fine. You can be here, but I'll go over to the other side, see what these guys have." So
Hmm.
I got Dave Arneson on the other side of the aisle shilling these guys stuff, and I got three dancing girls doing the Temple of Amukla guided tour, shilling people. We were flogging stuff off the table so fast it was leaving scorch marks. Because I had three guys with me as my crew, one guy to take the money, one guy to pick the order, one guy to give you the change.
Hmm.
It was that frantic. Boom,
Hmm.
boom, boom. So at the end of so they were there for me Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday, Dave took pictures of me standing there with the three of them,
Hmm.
and I still got those pictures that Dave gave me. I asked Malia, his daughter, "Do you want copies of these?" She said, "Sure." So, but yeah, I traded Arneson for three dancing girls. Word got out.
Oh, yes.
So a couple months later, we're at Gen Con in Milwaukee at the convention center, and I hear this on the back of my armor. Okay, so I'm wearing this, steel breast and back plate, and it's like
Yeah.
somebody's knocking on the plate. And I turn around holding my hot dog and Coke, and it's Gary. And he goes, "Young man," he always called me young man for some reason, I have no idea. "Young man, I understand that you traded David L. Arneson, the co-author of Dungeons and Dragons, for three dancing girls." And of course, everybody within 100 feet of this can hear him, because he's milking the crowd. You traded David L. Arneson for three dancing girls." And I said, "Yes, sir, I did. I have photographs to prove it." He goes, "Son, young man, I think you got the better part of the deal," and walked off laughing.
That's amazing.
Well, Gary knew me. Arneson would send me down to the TSR stockholders meetings
Hmm.
specifically to annoy the Bloom brothers.
Delicious.
And Gary and I would get to talking, and he was interested in Tekumel, and we would get to talking, and he started to run Greyhawk for me. We'd go out to
Hmm.
lunch and stuff afterwards.
Yeah.
That's how I met Gary. But I mean, Gary hugely respected Phil. I mean, he was genuinely astonished by Phil's academic credentials,
Hmm.
by the so that's why Empire of the Peltron came to be.
It's a world traveling linguist,
Yeah,
great artist.
yeah, yeah. And basically, Gary, was right up front. That's why he wrote such an effusive forward in the beginning of Empire of the Peltron. Dave
Hmm.
wrote the same thing later on. They were both hugely impressed. But yes, I did trade Dave Darnison for Three Dancing Girls.
And I think that's the best place for us to wrap it up here
Yeah,
because we had a whole hour. So hoping you guys enjoyed that,
yeah.
and we'll just go ahead and